Hello there, Blue Rockers. This is Stan's Bible class, and today we're coming to you from a new location. You can see over my shoulders right there is the Bay of Corinth, and behind that is a hillside, and right there is where the Corinthians that you hear about in the Bible existed. Yes, indeed, I am calling you today from Corinth in Greece, and we're going to be looking at a little bit of what I've seen. We're going to be here all week, so that means probably next week we'll have some even cooler stuff to talk about. This, of course, is where the Apostle Paul launched the first majorly successful church in Europe after working his way down through Philippi and Berea and Thessalonica and Athens, and finally working down to where we are today. And so what I'm going to do is address a little question that sort of came up last week when somebody asked me in the questions, which is the right form of Christianity? And I gave a few quick answers on different things that are considerations. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today, and that turned out to be particularly relevant because, of all things, for the first time in my life, I got to go to church today at a Greek Orthodox church. Some of our friends and his family were nice enough to take me there and give me a chance to sit through a lesson. Of course, it was all Greek to me, but it was still an amazing experience. Michael Taggart was with me, and he actually recorded a little sampling of the sound, so we'll just play you about 10 seconds of it right now. Okay, that's good. So that was the acoustics here are playing through an iPhone into a little mic and out across the internet to you. So I'm not sure you could truly appreciate how absolutely awesome that was. But in there, the acoustics were great. They had one of the best ones. That's an example of Byzantine chant as opposed to Gregorian chant, which you may remember hearing a little bit from monks or in the Roman Catholic Church. So that was a chief characteristic of the service, was an hour and a half or so of just beautiful music, awesome, inspiring music. And of course, the rest of the service, I really did not know or what it all meant or anything. There was communion served, and one of the things that was kind of interesting is my friend and his brother had two different opinions on whether people who were not Orthodox Greek Christians should participate in that. One said that we should not, that it was forbidden. The other one said, oh, it's okay. So even among two brothers in the church, there was some question of whether it was appropriate for people outside that community to participate in their particular ceremony. Anyhow, that's one of the things that I thought, boy, this is a great opportunity to mix together a lesson that is going to address the simultaneous set of questions from last week, which is the right form of Christianity. Is there such a thing as the right form of Christianity? What makes it right? And how different can we all be and still get along and please God? So that was the inspiration that was given to me while I was sitting there in church today. And as you can see right now, the sun is setting. I'm 7 hours ahead of where I normally am in Virginia. And so instead of being 1 o'clock Eastern time, we're here at 8 o'clock watching the sun go down. But at any rate, let's jump right into it and see if we can answer that kind of question. So, Connie, if we can have the next slide. This is a picture of the same scene that's behind me. I figured it would probably be dark by now. Maybe you got enough idea of it, but it's still, I'm sitting out on a deck with a beautiful view of the city of Corinth, and nestled in the foothills there is the city of ancient Corinth, where I will go tomorrow, and that's what we read a lot about in the book of Acts, Paul did there. That's where he met Priscilla and Aquila, the tent makers, worked with them, stayed there for several years, and planted a church that he wrote back to an awful lot after that. So if we go to the next picture, I wanted to sort of show you where it's located and why it's strategically important. That arrow on the left of the slide is pointing to this Bay of Corinth that sort of almost slices Greece in half. And if you look down in the lower right corner, you can see a little canal that got put in there shortly after they built the Suez Canal. The company that built that went over and sliced that. But in Paul's day, that was a land bridge. And in the picture above, you can see the view looking at that little connection of land. And that little line that I drew there is about where the canal goes through that cuts that. And, of course, you can imagine that saves an awful lot off of your trip if you want to ship something to Athens or really any place over in the, eastern side of Greece. Being able to cut through there would be really great. In Paul's day, people had to literally sail in there, unload their ships onto wheeled vehicles, and drag them across that 4-mile strip and load them on different boats and continue on their sails. But nowadays it's a really interesting canal, and in fact this next picture shows you what it looks like, and it's just an incredibly steep gorge, but ships go back and forth through that, and that's a piece of history. Alongside it is the old rutted trail where they used to haul things before they had the canal to allow people to go shipping through that. So the reason I mentioned all of that is because it wasn't an accident that Paul spent so much time in Corinth. You can imagine all the traffic passing through there. Talk about picking a strategic position from which to do his missionary work. By hanging out there, he would be seeing new people coming through all the time and be able to have contact. In some sense, they would come to him instead of him having to run around all over the place. So it was a very good location because of all the traffic cutting through that little 4-mile strip. Next one, Connie. This is a picture of a couple of the Greek Orthodox churches that we visited today. This is the big one that is dedicated to St. Paul. And as you can see, it's pretty magnificent and spectacular on the inside. And there are no words to describe it. But I guess the biggest characteristic of it is all the walls and the ceilings, kind of look like the Sistine Chapel, if you've seen that. Pictures that tell the story to people who, at one time were not necessarily literate, and this was the way that they could be taught the Bible, sort of like projecting a PowerPoint slide on the ceiling all over the place. You've got an entire presentation of the story of Christianity painted on the ceilings and walls, and it's just gorgeous. So if we go to the next slide, Connie, this was the one where we actually attended a service, and you can see some of the paintings on the ceiling and ornate chandeliers and the audience in there, this particular church. The men and women sat on opposite sides, women on the left, men on the right, although it wasn't strictly enforced, and I guess some women's liberals decided to sit over with the men, but generally that was the way it was intended to be organized. And so that was where I spent an hour and a half today with some close friends who were showing us around and were nice enough to let us see their ceremony that they were doing. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to just throw something else in here, just as we talk about how different Christianity can be from one branch to another. This is St. Catherine's Monastery on Mount Sinai, and people who live there, are living a very aesthetic lifestyle. It means limiting your comforts for God, making a sacrifice of your own comforts as a way of showing God you appreciate the sacrifice Jesus made for us. And that's nowhere called for in the Bible, but it is a something that some people practice. So we might ask, is this good or bad? They're doing something that's not asked for in the Bible. So it presumably is not necessary, but is it wrong to be doing? Okay, so I'm back on. I don't know whether everybody heard what I was talking about on the slide of St. Catherine's Monastery or not. But Connie is shaking her head, suspecting that maybe they didn't hear that. So I'm going to jump in right now and just say a little bit about that again. That particular monastery is a place where people would go live a life without many comforts. That's not required in the Bible. So is it wrong to do something that's not in the Bible? Or is it good to do that? We're not asked to do that. There's a lot of places in the Bible where God talks about it's He who gives you the ability to become wealthy or prosperous. And therefore, Abraham was prosperous. Job was prosperous. Certainly, Joseph, when he was prime minister of Egypt, was prosperous. Is that okay? Well, if so, then why are these people doing that, and is that good, or can we be that different? And so that is the kind of stuff we're talking about today. And so at this point, Connie, if we'll go to the next slide, and I'm going to first show you a couple slides that say, where do we draw the line in terms of the black and white issues that we're faced, and then after that, I'll show how much freedom we really have to be different. And so let's just look at Galatians, the very first chapter, when Paul wrote that letter to them. Now, that's over in modern-day Turkey, right in the middle of modern-day Turkey is where Galatia was. And here's what Paul said to them. I marvel that you are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel, which is not another, but there are some that trouble you, and would pervert the gospel of Christ. But though we, or an angel from heaven, preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. As we said before, so I say now again, if any man preach any other gospel to you than that which you have received, let him be accursed. Okay, so obviously, if you switch gospels and you teach something different than the fundamental message of Christianity, then you've gone too far. Paul wanted that type of teaching cursed as being something that would lead people astray and lead them from their faith. So elsewhere in Galatians, to be circumcised, which will be of no value to you. You've fallen from grace. You're now depending on human works to be saved. And therefore, it actually hurts you to go get circumcised. Although the physical act of being circumcised has no effect whatsoever. But if you believe that that's necessary to be saved, then that's another gospel. Because the gospel was Jesus Christ died for our sins and rose again. And as a result of that, faith and trust in Jesus Christ plus nothing else is what gets you into heaven. That's the good news. We can't do it ourselves. The gospel is Jesus did it for us. We're off the hook if we just trust him. And that's it. If you believe Jesus is Lord and that God raised him from the dead, then you are saved. And so anything that teaches something different than that is not only wrong, but accursed, as Paul would put it. But then he spends an enormous amount of time telling us how much freedom we have in terms of deciding how it is we're going to serve God and how it is we're going to worship him. Connie, if we go to the next slide, and we get this little statement here that, Galatians is called the Magna Carta of Christian freedom, because while Paul is busy cursing people who deviate from the gospel, he then goes on to spend the entire 5 chapters of Galatians expounding on Christian freedom and how much ability we have to do things differently. He says this: "For freedom in Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. Look, I, Paul, say to you that if you accept circumcision, Christ will be of no advantage to you. I testify again to every man who accepts circumcision that he is obligated to keep the whole law. You are severed from Christ, you who would be justified by the law. You have fallen away from grace." And that's from Galatians 5, not 1, as I have a mistake on my slide here. So, Connie, if we go to the next slide, we can see that this is an ongoing theme, not just in Corinthians, where I sit today, but also Romans chapter 14 has got a lot of discussion on this. And he goes on to say these words: "One person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains, and not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It is before his own master that he stands or falls, and he will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand." Isn't that exciting? So that means when we look at different branches of Christianity, and we see how they're doing one thing here and a different thing there, the service I saw today was absolutely awe-inspiring and gave great glory to God. Generally, we find in my own home denomination of Methodism a much more informal type of a worship service. There's still singing and there's more teaching, although there might have been some teaching going on there in the service that I couldn't detect since it was all in Greek. But I generally got the idea that it was more of a worship service, pure and simple, and nothing else. But that's what everybody there is used to, and it was very inspiring and certainly a beautiful example of worshiping God in a very profound way. So, what we were talking about right here, when it's talking about a person saying they could eat anything, back then there were a lot of sacrifices made to idols, and people would go down to the meat markets, and they couldn't tell whether the meat there came from some pagan temple where a sacrifice had occurred, or whether it was, pure meat that had not been abused in that way. And the Apostle Paul's words were that, hey, it depends on how it's viewed by the person eating. If I'm a person who knows that every T-bone steak in the world belongs to God, and I thank him for it, then it really doesn't matter what its past is. But on the other hand, if I'm worried about the fact that this meat was sacrificed to an idol, and it bugs me, or it bugs somebody else who might see me eat it, then it's better not to eat it for the sake of the person that it bothers. But whether you do or don't is not something that affects salvation. It's up to each person's conscience on what they should do about it. Okay, Connie, if we go a little bit further in Romans 14, he says another very interesting thing. One man considers one day more sacred than another, and another man considers every day alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. He who regards one day as special does so to the Lord. He who eats meat eats to the Lord, and he gives thanks to God. And he who abstains does so to the Lord and gives thanks to God. So, isn't that interesting? When we're busy arguing about, which type of Christianity is correct or not correct, it has nothing to do with all the little fine decorations that people put on how they choose to worship God. There can be a lot of different ways, as long as you've got those basic principles right of you're saved by Christ and no human activity whatsoever, and don't you let anybody add something you have to do other than trust in Jesus. That's the big difference. It tells you whether you can accept one teaching or another. Let's go on to another slide, Connie. And we're back to Corinthians, the letter to the people who are sitting behind me 2,000 years ago. And what he was saying to them about this kind of liberty, he says, however, not all possess this knowledge, stuff that I've just given you, but some, the mere association with idols, eat food really offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. Food will not commend us to God. We are no worse off if we do not eat, no better off if we do. But take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge of eating in an idol's temple, will he not be encouraged, if this is his conscience, is weak, to eat the food offered to idols? And so by your knowledge this weak person is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died, thus sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest it make my brother stumble. So what that basically means is, if I'm around somebody that's bugged by me eating meat, I shouldn't eat meat. But if I'm someplace else on a different day, and I'm with people who don't have a problem with it, I can go ahead and eat meat. And another place Paul says, I have become all things to all people, so that by all means I might save some. So when he's with Gentiles, non-Jewish people, he exercises his freedom and doesn't demand that of them. But when he's with Jewish people, he goes ahead and does Jewish practices because that's for their benefit. That way they're not upset. And in the particular case we had today, where they were taking communion, I was trying to decide whether or not to participate. I was invited by one person as, yeah, it's okay, and another person said, no, you shouldn't do it. What kind of decision did I make? Well, it was pretty simple. The person who didn't have a problem with it would not be offended if I didn't, but the person who did have a problem with it would be offended if I did. So guess what? I didn't do it. And that was the way you deal with this kind of thing as for the type of teaching that we have today. Okay, so let's go then, and we're approaching the summary. So at this point, if you want to get your questions ready and start typing them in for Connie, I've just got a couple slides left. But, we got a little time delay there while you're typing in your questions, so let me have it. But anyhow, in 1 Corinthians 10, he summarizes it up this way. This is Paul's letter to the Corinthians. Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any questions on the grounds of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner and you're disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising any question on the ground of conscience. But if Christ, then do not eat it, for the sake of the one who informed you, and for the sake of conscience. I do not mean your conscience, but his. Isn't that powerful? We're always thinking about what to do such that it will build up the church, not tearing apart Christ's church over disputable matters. So it's pretty clear that we can have a lot of forms of worship, and that people should do the type of worship that feels correct to them, and that'll be fine as long as you don't teach another gospel which is different from that one. That would take you into the range of that's not an acceptable type of church to accept, because we got to defend that. If you give up that simple thing of depending on Christ and no human works whatsoever, then anything else is apparently fair game. Okay, so here's how he summed it up in Romans. Do not, for the sake of food, destroy the work of God. Everything is indeed clean, But it is wrong for anyone to make another stumble by what he eats. It is good not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything that causes your brother to stumble. The faith that you have, keep between yourself and God. Blessed is the one who has no reason to pass judgment on himself for what he approves. But whoever has doubts is condemned if he eats, because the eating is not from faith. For whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. Now, this is an amazing thought. Okay? Something can be a sin, even if it's not a sin. You can make it into a sin if you think it's a sin and still do it, because the sin itself is disobeying God. Okay? And even if it was okay with God, if you think it's not okay and do it, then you are deliberately doing something you think God doesn't approve of, and he doesn't approve of that. So that's the ultimate thing. If your conscience is bothering you about something, don't do it. Okay, and then Romans 14:14, which is maybe something worth memorizing. And I would recommend actually reading all of Romans 14 on this subject. It's a nice self-contained unit on disputable matters. Anyhow, Paul says to the Romans, I know and am persuaded in the Lord Jesus that nothing is unclean in itself, but it is unclean for anybody who thinks it's unclean. And that's basically summarizing what I just said. Next slide, Connie. Oh, I think that's my last slide, in fact. So, with that, Connie, I'm going to look over here and see if you've got any questions that came in for me. And, oh, yeah, she's been posting questions like crazy here. Okay, Anonymous, any epiphanies while there? Well, yeah, the whole lesson was created as a result of an epiphany sitting there in that Greek Orthodox service, wondering how I should deal with the different parts of the service. I didn't want to do anything wrong. I didn't want to do anything to offend my host. And I didn't necessarily understand a whole lot of it. So I tried to do everything in a maximally respectful manner, and to try to use the opportunity to listen to the music, beautiful music, and to meditate. And this epiphany, if you want to call it that, was, yeah, this is a perfect concept for a lesson today, coming here from Corinth, which is where I experienced it. And so I had to scramble. This was a really tight pinch to get this all in, because it's been a busy, full-packed day of stuff. So only had a couple hours tonight to be able to put this together, but hopefully we got something worthwhile in here for you. And the question is, do you feel closer to Christ there? I feel something. It's not, closeness to Christ, that Christ is everywhere. I feel close to him all the time. And Christ was never in Corinth. So it's not that, but it certainly does give you a feeling of the Bible coming to life. And, reading those few chapters that start at chapter 16, 17, 18, 19 in Acts is where Paul is coming down through this region of Greece for the first time. And so definitely I'll be reviewing those chapters as we go along and touring all those different places. And next week at this time I intend to have some more insights, whatever they may be, from this particular location, and I'll show you some more pictures of the kind of things we've seen. And how is the food there? Well, we've had very good food. I can't say that we only basically got in. Last night was our first night here, and so I'm very jet lagged, and so I had my first luncheon, if you will, earlier today, and had a hamburger. So I'll give you more information about that as we go along. Okay, so hello there, Carolyn from New Zealand. Boy, I'd be jet lagged if I was from there right now. I'm only 7 hours away from home, and that's about all I can take in one sudden move. And So Betty says, "Hi all, it's great that Stan is taking time to be with us on his trip to Greece. Have an awesome time, Stan." Well, thank you. Here's a question from Jew for Jesus. Can I eat pork as a Jew for Jesus? Absolutely you can eat pork, but that's subject to whether your conscience will allow you to do it or not. You've had Jewish training, and for you and for Jews, pork is unclean because it was forbidden in the Old Testament. You'll remember that earlier in Acts, I'm going to say Acts chapter 10 or somewhere there around, Peter has a vision which shows a sheet coming down from heaven, and in it were all types of animals that were in this vision, the type of animals that Jewish people were forbidden to eat. And the voice came to him from that vision saying to Peter, "Take and eat." And Peter said, "No, Lord, I'd never do that. I have never defiled my lips with any such thing." And he was rebuked and said, "What God has made clean, let no man think is unclean." And so in that case, Peter was a Jew among many other Jews, and he had this lesson, this vision, that he went and communicated with the other apostles. So you can imagine how shocked they were to hear that they could have a ham sandwich. But since you have probably been taught that, it may still prick your conscience. And if you think God would disapprove, you're better off not eating it, even though you could as a Christian. Okay, so let's see. We're down here. A question from Anonymous. Are you taking pictures that we can see more of? Oh, yeah. I'm going around here with some of our BitShare buddies. Michael here is with me, and Once Upon a Time is here. And Lion Danny is the guy that's nice enough to take me to church with his family today. So, yeah, we're going around with them. And, while we're driving to see all the sites, we're talking BitShares. But when we step out into those sites, we're talking Christianity and the significance of everything that happened there. And we'll be comparing notes, taking pictures, and turning that into next week's lesson. And so, bigger than 3, you look happy. Is that because you are there or BTS is up? Well, those two go together, and I'm very happy with that. I was just telling Connie before we started, oh my gosh, I got to go close out some shorts while it's up this high. And then I said, but I can't do it until I've done this lesson, so I'm itching to go take care of that little task. But as I remarked to Michael, well, some of us have great sacrifices. We have to delay when we can do market orders in order to do something more important. Other people have it a lot easier. They only have to get nailed to a cross and suffer and die. So, when you look at it from that perspective, it's really not a problem at all. But I am happy to see that BitShares is up right now. Very exciting. Okay, let's see. Higher Life says, is it wrong for me to eat pork while with my Jewish friends? I do it all the time. That's another interesting. Paul says expressly that if it causes concern and outrage with your Jewish friends, then you should not do it. So that's open and closed. If it doesn't bother them, if they've given up on you and say, well, we'll be friends, but they don't like the fact that you've recognized that their Messiah did come 2,000 years ago and they missed it. Well, you have to figure it out what's appropriate with them. Don't do it if it bothers them, and if it doesn't bother them, go right ahead. Okay, are you getting chills knowing what is behind you and the history of where you are? Yes, I got to tell you, I'm a history buff, and this just makes it all come alive. I just cannot wait to go see the different parts of this. Acts is one of my favorite books because it contains so much history in it, and seeing those historical sites really strengthens the credibility of the Bible. Some other time I'll do a lesson talking about all of the archaeological discoveries that have been found in the past 100 or so years that confirm things in the book of Acts from this time frame. And a couple hundred years ago, people were saying, we got no evidence that there were praetors in Philippi and proconsuls in Corinth. And there were all kinds of different titles that are used by Luke for different leaders of the different cities he visited. And they thought it was all made up. But since then, archaeological evidence has come up showing that Gallo was really proconsul of Achaia, which is this part of Greece, during that particular year 50 when Paul was there. And interestingly enough, that is exactly the year when the emperor kicked all the Jews out of Rome. And when Paul talks about Priscilla and Aquila showing up to make tents with him, they had just arrived from Rome when he was there, which would make sense if historically we know that's the year Jews were kicked out of Rome. So just it all ties together. It's just so incredibly exciting. It blows my mind. Okay, so here's Forever Me asks, how do I honor my mother and father when they did horrible things to me as a child? I'm 64 and yet to understand that I struggle with it daily. Yes, something like that, gets deep into your psyche, and it's very hard. But it is possible to honor them, even knowing that they're not perfect. Keep in mind, although your experiences might have been, out there on the worst possible experiences, no parent is perfect. Every single parent out there has had some things they've done wrong. So we've all got the same issue, just a different degree. And we're supposed to forgive that. And if you're able to forgive that, it can be like a huge load that has come off your shoulders. But it's only if you can let go. And I'm not saying that's easy at all, but I do say it's worth trying. And if you can do that, then I think you'll find it to be a liberating experience. Okay, comments. Hey, what are your plans while you are there? Well, Once Upon a Time hasn't told me all his plans. I have no idea. I do know that we get to go see Athens and Mars Hill, where Paul did his Mars Hill sermon. I don't know whether we'll make it up to Thessalonica, where the Thessalonians were, or pass through Berea on the way. But all of those are possible. I think tomorrow we are going to go over and see the ruins at Corinth, and so I'll go wherever he's got stuff to show me, and let it be sort of a surprise there as we go along. And okay, Brighter, who is my favorite, Peter or Paul? Well, Paul, hands down. I respect Peter and everything, and he was a significant leader. But Paul wrote half the New Testament, and even Peter said that Paul's writings were Scripture. And so, Peter's spectacular, but Paul is amazing, especially if you understand a little bit about the Apostle Paul, because he didn't start out as a Christian. He started out as a Pharisee, and he went through all the training, working his way up to be a Rhodes Scholar in Phariseedom. And part of that is studying under this super Pharisee, like a 5-star general. You don't often get 5-star generals in the world. Mostly they stop at 4 stars, except in times of big wars. Well, there's only a few exalted rabbis. Gamaliel was one of them, and Gamaliel was a guy Paul studied under. And Gamaliel insisted that Paul learn 4 different languages, and that he get all these skills and knowledge of the Bible, and that he learn tent making. And that's why you see everywhere Paul went on his mission trips, he's earning his own way, making tents, so that he can fund his whole mission team as he goes along, so that they can eat. And everywhere he goes, he sets that up, and that's why he wound up meeting Priscilla and Aquila, because they were tent makers too. And so sitting around in the marketplace making tents. Typically, when he was at, they would make tents in the early morning while it was cool, and then everybody would take a siesta in the afternoon. Paul would teach in the synagogues and in other places, wherever he could get places to teach, until evening, and then the second half of the workday would start, and people would make tents or whatever their trade was in the evening as well. And so that was his busy day as it went along. But yeah, if you study Paul, there's just so much more to know about him. Peter appears in the Gospels, of course, and he does make an appearance in the first few books of Acts. But Paul, to me, was just an amazing guy in the right place at the right time to come along and take everything that the fishermen and tax collectors and simple people had learned and were going out to be witnesses about. Paul came in with the Pharisees' knowledge of everything about what the Old Testament meant, and therefore was able to explain it in terms of the new gospel in a much deeper way than the other disciples were able to do. Okay, next question from BB. Can we see the other people there with you? Well, anybody that wants to show up right now, here's your chance to poke your face in. Okay. And so this is Michael. Yes, and he doesn't look anything like an archangel, I will tell you that.
I'm undercover.
Oh, okay. And Paul's over there. If he gets around, he can poke his head in just a few minutes while I'm looking up the next question. And, of course, Connie's sitting there behind her golden microphone. Yeah. So go ahead and lower your head down to where they can see you a little. There he is. That is Paul, once upon a time. And he is a major, long-term fan for BitShares in general. When he met me at the airport, he was wearing a BitShares t-shirt. Today he's wearing a Steam It t-shirt. And who knows what he'll have on tomorrow. But lots of good stuff. And meanwhile, Michael's sending me images on the Skype right now, making all kinds of noise. What can I say? Yeah, he sent them to me a long time ago. They're finally popping in, making all kinds of noise. But I can't turn off Skype or mute it because of obvious reasons. But that's where we're sending you this stuff. Just think of it as sound effects. You know, Connie likes to put her own sound effects in. And for emphasis, I'm adding all these other noises. There, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Okay, so how long will you be there, and are there other locations planned? Well, we'll take it one step at a time. But, I'll be here the rest of the week, get home on Cinco de Mayo, and my next known trip is over to the middle of China towards the end of May. So we'll see what all happens on there. Let's see. Continue on going to, are you getting chills knowing what's behind you? Okay, I think I answered that question. Yes, I'm getting chills just thinking about the history. It's amazing. Okay, comment. Shout out to some of our blue rockers. Pat Konziak, Cryptocurrency, Betty A. Ah, okay. So shout. And Connie is still typing, but I've caught up with all the available questions that we have so far. But no, it's really been a delight to be here. And yes, someone golfer is asking, you have someone named Once Upon a Time there, and Michael X. Who are they? Well, handle. My son Dan Larimer, the inventor of BitShares and Steam It and EOS, is known as Bytemaster. And not wanting to upstage him, I took a much more humble name and called myself Nibblemeister, because nibble is about half a byte. So everyone's got a handle here, but Once Upon a Time's real name is Paul, and of course we all know Michael X is Michael Taggart. So those are the two guys that are here with me right now as we plot the future of BitShares, at least from our perspective. Crypto Economy says to Stan and everyone arriving late from church. Yeah, I've got a little more spare time because I'm 7 hours early here. As you can see, it's gotten dark behind me while it's middle of the afternoon where you're probably at. And Connie is typing again furiously. Oh, by the way, we're not done. These guys are nice enough to delay dinner until after I get done answering your questions. So they're sitting here, gasping like they're crawling across the desert, looking at me like, when are we going to eat? Where's the next oasis? And, they're looking more pitiful than Connie's dog. But at any rate, let's see. Scrolling down here. Let's see. What did I miss by being late? Where are you? I am in Greece, in the city of Corinth, where Paul wrote his letter to the Corinthians. And yes, we'll be in Greece here all week, visiting other places. When they asked me what did I want to see, well, what I wanted to see most in Greece was all the places that are mentioned in the New Testament. And I'm sure they'll show us some other things, like we got to go to a nice hot spa today and splash around there for a little while. So who knows what other things they might have planned. But yeah, I'll give you a complete report next week, and lots of more Bible content coming from this part of the world. Okay. All right. So the question from Larry is, what do you think of the letter from Paul? Well, Paul wrote many letters. Basically almost 50% of the Old Testament, or of the New Testament, is letters from Paul. So I don't know. I've lost track how many there are. There are probably about a dozen, and every one of them is, really well worth the time. It is he who really explained Christianity, to the rest of us best. After you got through the Matthew, Mark, and Luke synoptic Gospels, you get to John, who gives a lot more insights about what it means spiritually, and then Paul comes along in book after book after book, letter after letter after letter, and explains stuff through all that time. And that's how we really know that most of the details of Christianity are from the teachings of Rabbi Paul, the great Pharisee Rhodes Scholar. Okay. And what is the moral and bigger message to this wonderful series you are sharing with us? Okay, well, I guess part of what I do at one level is, instead of the typical way people study the Bible, which is to, read one chapter at a time or work their way through it in the order which it's presented, what I try to do is, my modest little help, is to pick a topic and gather up everything the Bible has to say on that topic, so you get a dose of that subject and everything the Bible says on it. So that's generally how all my lessons go. This particular series, Things We Know That Just Ain't So, is where I do something that I think is extremely important, which is to find things people believe, Christians believe, that aren't true, because it's seeped into them from secular society, and they think it's true, but the fact of the matter is the Bible says no. And, not all of those things are things that the typical person isn't digging in deep and studying real hard, as everybody should be, but of course most of us don't, and therefore we're susceptible to teachings that aren't true. And so I've tried to pick up a bunch of them. I got probably more than a dozen such lessons that I wanted to share with everybody, so that you understand that reading the Bible is to learn things and unlearn things, both. And that means you probably need to get a little assistance of either a good commentary or some reliable Bible teacher who can pull that type of stuff together for you if you don't like doing that research yourself. But if you just read the Bible straight through, you're only going to get part of the story. And it's helpful to, I hope, for some of you to see it all brought together this way. Okay, boy, she's just pasting away here. So, let's see. Paul Westfield, thank you for sharing, Stan. Hey, it's my pleasure. I can't believe you guys actually listen to me, but I appreciate it. And we also have Betty, who says, I love your style of gathering information and relating it to us. Thank you for your time. Well, once again, thank you for listening. I do this because you guys take the time to actually ask questions, and you make the show by doing that. So I much appreciate it. Okay, and then I have in all caps from Connie, the producer and director and overall advisor for this show. She says, you're all set to close the show and go eat Greek food. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Thank you, everybody, for coming here tonight and or this afternoon where you are and joining in on this. And, we'll be back again next week, Lord willing, with all our other adventures from here in Greece. And at this point, don't forget to upvote things and do all the other things Connie normally tells you, like looking at all the notes that are down below, where she'll have other references for you, and go with that. And there's another question that just came in after I've closed out the show that says, what are my opinions on the Gospel of Thomas? We'll take that in another lesson, but that is not generally regarded to be a inspired text, and there are reasons for that. So we'll go into that at another time whenever we might talk about some of those other things that were rejected when they picked which books had apostolic authority, meaning traceable back to a real apostle or someone who worked closely with him. Okay, Connie, I think we're all done, and talk to you next time.